There's two lawsuits happening in New York that I just want to make people aware of. One is a follow-up of sorts from the interview we did with Carissa Phelps in Las Vegas. She was the sex trafficking survivor. She had some controversial opinions that we had talked about on that day regarding Sesta Fosta and the who is financing the sort of lax enforcement against sex workers. She didn't believe there was such a thing as sex workers, which I was quite clear with her, I think is a mistake. But
Soros is doing it.
That's basically what she had said. However, the basic premise of what she was talking about was that she had been trafficked as a 12-year-old girl. She was caught up in the foster care system, fell through the cracks, was preyed upon by a guy who trafficked her and ultimately had her as a working, basically to he would get paid for her to be raped in a hotel in wasn't Fresno, California, but a small town around there. Maybe it was Fresno. And she said 20 years later, when she had gotten out of that situation, she went back to these hotels, and the same thing was still happening. And after 10 years of activism, she basically decided that the route to follow was to sue. So about 95% of this stuff happens in motels that are owned by large corporations. And it was to sue these corporations to force them to either shut down or to protect and prevent these types of, businesses, in quotes, from operating out of their hotels. So it is a different attorneys working on this case, is my understanding. They are working somewhat with some of the lawyers that we spoke to in Las Vegas. But this is in the, I think the New York Daily News or the Post, I think it was. A $10 million suit brought by a woman who is now in her 20s, identified by the initials SJ. She was a 10-year-old girl when she was raped, tortured, and beaten, sold for sex at two New York motels as the staff turned a blind eye to her obvious abuse. Suit was filed here just down the street in Brooklyn Federal Court. It's the first of its kind in New York. Claims that Wyndham Hotels and Resorts and Choice Hotels Corporation were complicit in the girl's abuse by operating franchises that chose, quote, to ignore the open and obvious presence of sex trafficking at their properties. She claims that she was sold for sex as many as 15 to 20 times a day at a Howard Johnson in Jamaica, Queens, operated by Wyndham, and an Econo Lodge in the Bronx, operated by Choice Hotels, between 2006 and 2009, between the ages of 10 and 13, when she was. She met her sex trafficker shortly after she escaped from a foster home where she was being sexually and physically abused, the suit says, adding that she entered foster care after her father was caught molesting her. The girl's trafficker, a 25-year-old man, gained her trust, took her virginity, forced her to service his clients, telling her how you make daddy happy is by making them happy. Wyndham and Choice Hotels have since signed on to a Tourism Child Protection Code of Conduct created by a leading anti-trafficking policy organization. And the Code of Conduct outlines 6 steps companies can take to prevent child sex trafficking. But, as we heard from Carissa Phelps, it's quite obvious what's going on there. They have cameras half the time anyways. They can see what's happening. They just choose to continue to profit off it. Occasionally, some other guests may call the cops because they see something, or there's some big violent event or something that calls for a warrants calling the cops. The cops show up. They arrest the people in that moment and never come back until there is a specific reason to, as opposed to saying like, hey, this seems to be a functioning sex traffic den. So hopefully, and this is why when the system breaks down like this, because basically the greed, who knows what the relationships are between these hotel franchises and local governments. 3 or 4 hotels in a small municipality can make a big difference to the local economy. And that gives those people power over the city lawmakers or city managers or whatnot, and maybe the police departments. So this is where, lawsuits like this, where you can interrupt the sort of the business that's going on, are really important.